Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive, this time into the wild world of Polish academia.
Yeah, we're going to be taking a look at what shapes research productivity there and how academic careers actually play out in Poland.
Yeah, we've got this fascinating research report from 2024, packed with data, and honestly, some of the stuff in here is pretty surprising.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to see how Poland kind of fits into the broader trends that we're seeing in higher education around the world.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, one of the things that jumped out at me right away was this thing they call the 1050 rule. It turns out just 10% of researchers in Poland are putting out half of the publications.
Wow, that's a pretty big concentration of output, isn't it?
Right, I was like 10%, that's it.
Yeah, you might think that's something unique to Poland, but actually it's a pattern that researchers have observed in lots of different countries.
Oh,
Yeah, back in 2011, there was a study by Albaron and some colleagues, and they found the same thing even when they looked at specific fields like microbiology. So it's not just like, oh, some fields are more productive than others. This concentration of output is happening across the board.
okay, so if it's happening everywhere, what's the explanation? I mean, is it just that some people are like, research superstars, or is there something about the system that's kind of rigged in a way to favor a select few?
Right. Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's probably a combination of factors.
Yeah.
You've got individual talent, you've got how dedicated someone is to their research, but then there's also, the whole structure of institutions, how research funding is allocated, and, those things can create advantages for certain people.
Yeah, so maybe it's not a totally level playing field right from the get-go.
Exactly. And that makes you wonder, are the resources being used in a way that actually supports the widest range of researchers, or are we just kind of, perpetually backing the same winners?
Interesting. Okay, so we've got this 1050 thing, and then it gets even more interesting because the study suggests that basically how productive you are as a researcher is pretty much set super early in your career.
Yeah. It is remarkable how those early patterns are so consistent.
Yeah, they even use this phrase jumpers and fallers to describe people who either, dramatically increase or decrease their output later on. And guess what they found? Almost nobody does that.
Right. Like, it's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine, you're starting your research career. If you're hitting it out of the park early on, chances are you'll probably keep doing well. But if you start off a little bit slower, it might be harder to catch up later.
That's kind of intense, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, but what does that mean for how we decide who gets funding or, how we develop talented researchers? Do we just bet on the early high achievers, or do we try to create a system where, people can kind of grow more over time?
I mean, those are really important questions, and they're at the heart of how we think about, academic careers. Should we just be rewarding what people have already achieved, or should we be, thinking more about potential and how do we cultivate that potential?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's like we're trying to predict, who's going to be the next big research star straight out of the gate, and what happens to those who maybe, blossom a bit later. Is there even space for them in this kind of system?
Yeah, that's a really critical question for the future of academia, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're always prioritizing those early wins, we might be missing out on major contributions from people who, find their stride a little later down the line.
Right. Not everyone's journey is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this pattern of early success being really important. And then let's add another layer here. The report digs into gender disparities.
Right, because this is where things get even more complex.
Yeah. And so they found that when they looked at researchers with high aspirations, both for salary and for the impact of their work, men were way overrepresented in that group. They even called them dreamers. So I'm curious, why would that be?
Yeah, well, it does seem to line up with a lot of the research that's out there about the gender pay gap in academia. For instance, there was a study in 2023 by Kim Chen and Weinberg that found...
Hold on, before we go too deep into other studies, can we just unpack this dreamers thing a little bit more? I'm curious, within that group of ambitious researchers, were men asking for way more money than the women?
That's actually really interesting. What they found is that within that dreamers group, the men's salary expectations weren't that much higher than the women.
So it's not like the men are being super greedy or anything, but it's more like they see themselves as those high achievers more often in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, and that suggests there's something deeper going on here than just money. It could be about societal expectations. It could be unconscious bias. It could even be, differences in access to mentors and support networks, things that affect how women see their own potential within academia.
Right. If you don't see people like you succeeding in a certain way,
Yeah.
it's hard to picture yourself doing it too.
Absolutely. And this actually connects to another finding in the report, which is that women, when they were asked about their ideal work week, they said they would spend a larger chunk of that time on other work.
Other work.
Yeah. So what do you think that tells us about work-life balance and how tasks are divided up in academia?
Yeah. Other work, that sounds like a kind of code word for all the stuff that doesn't directly involve research,
Right.
right? Like committee work, admin tasks,
Mm-hmm.
mentoring, all that.
Exactly. Yeah. And it raises the question of whether women in academia are shouldering a heavier load of that kind of work compared to their male colleagues. And that could be due to, a whole host of factors, but certainly cultural norms play a role. And also the expectation that, women are more likely to take on these kinds of responsibilities.
And if you're bogged down with that kind of work, then you have less time for research, which then can affect your career progression. It's like this vicious cycle.
It is. It's a really complex interplay of factors, and unfortunately, it often contributes to that gender gap that we were talking about earlier.
For sure. Okay, so now the report also looks at the different types of institutions in the Polish higher ed system. They break it down into traditional universities, profiled universities, and then public vocational schools.
Right. Different flavors of university.
Right, exactly. And so did they find any differences in, how researchers fare depending on where they are?
They did. Yeah. One interesting finding was that academics at the Polish Academy of Sciences, they call it PAN, they tend to prioritize research really highly, and they also have fewer administrative burdens compared to those working at universities.
So PAN is like the research haven of Poland.
In a way, yes. Yeah. Their structure and their focus really allow researchers to dedicate themselves to their work. And it kind of makes you wonder if there are things that universities could learn from Pan's model in terms of, creating an environment that's more conducive to research.
That's really interesting. Okay, so you've got these different types of institutions. And then on top of that, there was that big higher education reform in Poland back in 2018 that introduced these university councils. And the report mentions that university presidents, the rectors, have kind of mixed feelings about how much of an impact these councils have actually had.
Right. And this is a great example of how these broader debates about university governance, actually play out in the real world. I mean, back in 2014, Gronitska and Masson did some research on this. And
hold on, before we get into that, can you just tell me a little bit more about what these councils are actually like? What are the rectors saying about them?
Sure, yeah. So these councils were designed to bring in more external stakeholders, people from outside the university, to kind of, increase accountability and make sure that universities are in tune with the needs of society. The idea was that this outside perspective would be beneficial. However, some rectors feel like these councils have actually created unnecessary tension, and they kind of complicate the power dynamics within the university.
Yeah, it's like trying to find that sweet spot between, having some oversight, but also making sure that academics still have the freedom to do their thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge that a lot of countries and institutions are wrestling with. How do you get that balance right?
So we've got these different types of universities, these councils trying to steer things, and this whole idea that your destiny in your research career is kind of set early on. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about international collaboration and how much researchers are moving around. So the report highlights how connected PAN is internationally, especially because of its strong ties to international grants. I mean, that makes sense, right? If you're collaborating with people from other countries, you're more likely to get those kinds of grants.
Right, because you have a wider network, you're bringing in different perspectives.
Exactly. Now, did the report say anything about, Polish researchers in general and how much they're collaborating internationally?
It did, and this is actually a really interesting part. They found that older Polish researchers are less mobile internationally compared to their younger counterparts.
Oh,
Yeah. So it makes you wonder if that's a trend that's specific to Poland or if we're seeing a broader generational shift happening across academia,
So it's like the younger generation is more comfortable hopping around the globe for research.
It could be. Yeah, maybe they're just more used to a globalized world and all the opportunities that it brings.
Or maybe it's even about how they see themselves professionally, right? Maybe they identify as part of this global research community first and foremost, rather than being tied to one specific country.
That's a fascinating idea, and it speaks to how the very definition of an academic career might be changing in the 21st century.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, there's one last little tidbit from the report that I wanted to touch on. They found that researchers in the natural sciences and humanities spend way more time on research compared to those in technical and medical fields.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it makes you think about all the different demands of academic life depending on what you're studying.
Right. Like, what are the competing priorities?
Totally. So is it just that, people in those fields are just more passionate about research, or are there some structural reasons for this difference in how they spend their time?
I mean, it's probably a mix of things, right? It could be the nature of the research itself. It could be how funding works in those fields. It could be how much research is balanced against other responsibilities. Think about doctors, for example. They have to balance research with their clinical work, which takes up a huge amount of time.
Right. That's really a fair comparison to just look at, how many hours someone's spending in the lab or in the library.
Right.
Each field has its own kind of rhythm and its own set of demands.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it highlights the importance of understanding those differences and, respecting the challenges that come with working in different areas of research.
For sure. Wow. This has been quite a deep dive already. We've gone from this 10-50 rule that shows, how concentrated research output is, to this whole question of whether the system is kind of set up to favor early achievers. And then there's this gender gap, which is obviously a huge issue. And all these differences between institutions and how international collaboration is playing out.
It's been a whirlwind tour, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Exactly. And for you listening out there, we would love to know what stood out to you so far. What surprised you, what resonated with your own experiences in academia, or even just your ideas about how research works.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to hear different perspectives on these things.
And speaking of perspectives, I think it's time to zoom out a bit and think about the bigger picture here. We've seen how these patterns of research success seem to get established really early on. So if that's the case, how do we even begin to identify and support those promising young researchers without accidentally shutting out the late bloomers?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it really challenges us to rethink our assumptions about what academic success looks like and to consider maybe some alternative pathways that might be better suited to accommodating those different timelines and trajectories.
Maybe we need to ditch this idea of this straight and narrow career path with these preset milestones and be more open to a system where people can explore, experiment, and even change direction if their passions evolve over time.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine a system that actually encourages researchers to take risks, to pursue those unconventional ideas, and even to switch fields if their interests shift. It would be like opening up a whole new world of possibilities for discovery and innovation.
That does sound pretty radical, but also super exciting.
Yeah.
It's like instead of everyone trying to climb the same academic ladder, we're recognizing that some people thrive when they can forge their own path through the research forest.
I love that analogy.
And just like a forest benefits from having all kinds of different trees and plants.
Oh.
The world of research thrives on diversity of thought, approaches, and experiences.
Absolutely.
And speaking of diversity, we can't just gloss over those gender disparities that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Men being overrepresented in that dreamers group. That's a big red flag.
Yeah, we need to figure out what's driving that gap in ambition and really tackle it head on. That means challenging societal norms, fighting unconscious bias, and creating environments where women feel truly empowered to chase their research dreams to the fullest.
Because it's not just about having equal opportunities on paper. It's about making sure everyone has a real shot at achieving their academic goals, regardless of gender. And that includes tackling those potential imbalances in workload that we discussed earlier.
Absolutely. We need to make sure those service tasks and administrative duties are being distributed fairly and that women aren't disproportionately burdened.
Right. Because let's be real, if you're drowning in paperwork and committee meetings, you're not going to have the time or the energy to do groundbreaking research. And we all lose out when talented researchers are held back by administrative overload.
100%.
Okay, so now going back to what we were saying about the Polish Academy of Sciences, they seem to have a good thing going with their strong emphasis on research and that lighter administrative load.
They do. They seem to have figured some things out.
Yeah, they do. And it raises the question of whether universities could adapt some of Pan's strategies, to create a more research-focused environment. Could streamlining administration free up more time for academics to actually, focus on their scholarship?
Yeah, it's like we need to clear the clutter so that researchers can really concentrate on what they do best, which is pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the role of those university councils, as we saw. There are some pretty mixed opinions about how they're impacting university governance.
Yeah, it seems like finding that right balance between, getting input from outside the university and protecting academic freedom is a delicate dance.
It is. It's an ongoing conversation. And different countries are trying out different models to try and find that sweet spot.
Yeah, it's like trying to find the right recipe for a delicious cake.
Hmm?
You need the right ingredients and the right proportions to create something truly special. Too much of one thing can throw the whole balance off.
That's a great way to put it. And in this case, the ingredients are external oversight, academic freedom, and institutional autonomy.
Exactly.
And just like with a cake, there's no one-size-fits-all recipe. Each institution needs to kind of find the approach that works best for its own unique context and goals.
Absolutely. What works for one university might not work for another. So it's about finding the right balance for your specific environment and needs.
Okay, so we've explored the, complexities of university governance and that tension between external input and academic autonomy. Now let's shift our focus back to the global research landscape.
Yeah.
Remember that finding about older Polish researchers being less internationally mobile.
Yes.
It makes you wonder, is it just a Polish thing, or are we seeing a bigger shift across generations in academia?
Right. Are younger academics just more accustomed to a globalized world and all the opportunities that come with it?
Maybe it's about being more comfortable with technology and virtual collaboration.
That's certainly possible. Yeah, with all the digital communication and online collaboration tools that we have these days, it's easier than ever for researchers to connect and work together no matter where they are physically located.
And maybe it's also a mindset thing, right? Maybe younger academics see themselves as, global citizens of the research community, not bound by national borders.
That's an interesting perspective, and it suggests a real shift in how academics are defining their professional identity and the scope of their work.
Yeah, for sure. And then last but not least, we can't wrap up without mentioning the fascinating finding about researchers in the natural sciences and humanities dedicating more time to research than those in technical and medical fields.
Right. It really is a reminder that academic work is so incredibly diverse across disciplines.
It's like each field has its own rhythm and its own set of demands.
Exactly. And it underscores the importance of recognizing and respecting those differences.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive has really taken us into the heart of academic life, hasn't it? Revealing both its shared characteristics and its remarkable diversity.
It really has. We've explored this intricate interplay of individual ambition, institutional structures, and global trends, and we've uncovered some really thought-provoking questions along the way.
We have, and for you listening out there, we would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What resonated with you? What questions are you still grappling with? What insights did you gain from this deep dive?
Yeah, we're always eager to hear different perspectives and continue the conversation.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What is it?
Remember that finding from the report about researchers in the natural sciences and humanities spending more time on research compared to those in technical and medical fields.
Yes, it was a surprising one.
It really made me think about how we define and measure research productivity across different disciplines. Are we using the right metrics? Are we valuing different types of research contributions equally?
That's a crucial question, and it gets to the heart of what we consider valuable in academia. Are we prioritizing certain types of research outputs over others? Are we overlooking valuable contributions that might not fit neatly into our traditional measures of productivity?
It's like we're trying to compare apples and oranges. Each discipline has its own unique rhythm, its own set of demands, and its own ways of contributing to the advancement of knowledge.
Exactly, and it's important to recognize and value those differences rather than trying to force everything into a single standardized framework.
This deep dive has really highlighted the incredible diversity of the academic world and the need for a more nuanced understanding of what constitutes research success.
I couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond those simplistic metrics and embrace a more holistic view of research contributions.
Because true innovation and breakthroughs often come from those unexpected places, from those researchers who are pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
Absolutely. It's in those spaces of creative exploration and intellectual risk-taking that we often find the most transformative discoveries.
This deep dive has been a journey of exploration and discovery, hasn't it? We've delved into the complexities of the academic world, uncovered hidden trends, and grappled with some of the biggest challenges facing researchers today.
It has, and it's clear that there are no easy answers. But by asking these tough questions, by challenging our assumptions, and by embracing a more inclusive and dynamic vision of research, we can create a more vibrant, equitable, and impactful academic landscape.
So for you listening out there, we encourage you to continue this journey of exploration. Keep asking those tough questions. Keep challenging the status quo, and keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
because it's in those spaces of intellectual curiosity and fearless exploration that true breakthroughs are made.
This deep dive might be over, but your journey of discovery is just beginning.
Keep diving deep.
Yeah, it's like we're so focused on spotting, the rising stars that we might be missing out on the folks who just need a little more time to kind of, find their shine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it makes you wonder, is our current system flexible enough to nurture that kind of talent?
Right. Maybe instead of putting so much emphasis on those early achievements, we need to find ways to support exploration and, even allow for some detours along the way. I mean, what if someone's most groundbreaking work happens 10, 15, even 20 years into their career?
It's definitely worth considering. I mean, imagine a system where researchers are actually encouraged to take risks, to, pursue those unconventional ideas, and even to switch fields entirely if their passions evolve over time.
Now, that would be a game changer, wouldn't it?
It would.
It would be like saying, hey, we value your curiosity. We value your willingness to explore and your potential to make a difference no matter when that aha moment hits you.
Exactly. By embracing a more dynamic and inclusive approach to academic careers, we might unlock a wealth of hidden talent and potential that's currently being overlooked.
And who knows what incredible discoveries we're missing out on because we're so fixated on this idea of, this straight and narrow path to academic success.
It's an exciting thought to imagine a research landscape where, diverse paths are not just tolerated, but actually celebrated.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about shaking things up in terms of career paths and supporting those late bloomers. But we can't forget about those gender disparities that we uncovered earlier, that whole dreamers issue with men being so overrepresented. I mean, that needs some serious attention.
I agree. We can't just, brush those findings aside. We need to get to the root of what's causing that gap in ambition and, really work towards creating a more equitable and inclusive academic environment.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's not enough to just say, well, everyone has the same opportunities. We need to dig deeper and figure out, why women might not be seeing themselves as those high-achieving dreamers as often as men.
Right, and that might involve tackling some pretty deeply ingrained, societal norms and biases that affect how women are perceived and how they perceive themselves within academia.
Yeah, it's like we need to dismantle those invisible barriers that might be holding women back from really pursuing their research aspirations to the fullest.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture where women feel supported, encouraged, and empowered to pursue their research goals without any limitations.
And part of that is addressing those potential imbalances in workload that we discussed earlier. We need to make sure that those service tasks and administrative duties are being distributed fairly and that women aren't carrying a disproportionate share of that burden.
Absolutely. If someone is constantly, bogged down with committee work and admin tasks, they're simply not going to have the time or the energy to devote to, groundbreaking research. And that hurts everyone in the long run.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a marathon while carrying a backpack full of rocks. You might still make it to the finish line, but it's going to be a much tougher and slower journey.
That's a great analogy.
And it highlights why, creating a more equitable and supportive environment is so crucial for really fostering, research excellence. Okay, so we've talked about gender disparities and the need to create a more level playing field for everyone. Now, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier, the Polish Academy of Sciences, or PAN-ASH. They seem to be doing something right with their strong focus on research and that lighter administrative burden.
They do. They seem to have struck a really good balance.
Yeah, they do, and it makes you wonder what universities can learn from their model. Could adopting some of PAN's strategies, help universities to foster a more research-intensive environment?
Right. Could streamlining administration free up more time for academics to actually focus on their scholarship?
Yeah, it's like we need to create those pockets of research haven within universities, places where researchers can really immerse themselves in their work without being constantly pulled in different directions.
I like that idea. Creating those dedicated spaces could really be a game changer in terms of fostering a culture of deep focus and intellectual exploration.
For sure. And it would send a powerful message to researchers. That their scholarship is valued and that the institution is really committed to supporting their pursuit of knowledge.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment that fosters, both individual brilliance and collaborative innovation.
Now let's bring back those university councils that we talked about earlier. It seems like there's still a lot of debate about, their role and impact on university governance.
Yes. It's a complex issue with strong opinions on both sides. Some see these councils as a way to bring in valuable outside perspectives and ensure accountability.
And others worry about potential overreach and, interference with academic freedom.
Exactly. It's a balancing act, and different countries and institutions are, experimenting with different models, trying to find that sweet spot.
It's like trying to find the right recipe for a delicious cake.
Mm-hmm.
You need the right ingredients and the right proportions to create something truly special. Too much of one thing can throw the whole balance off.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And in this case, the ingredients are external oversight, academic freedom, and institutional autonomy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just like with a cake, there's no one-size-fits-all recipe. Each institution needs to kind of find the approach that works best for its own unique context and goals.
Absolutely. What works for one university might not work for another, so it's about finding the right balance for your specific environment and needs.
Okay, so we've explored the complexities of university governance and that tension between external input and academic autonomy. Now let's shift our focus back to the global research landscape. Remember that finding about older Polish researchers being less internationally mobile.
Yes.
It made us wonder, is that just a Polish thing, or is it part of a larger generational shift in how academics approach international collaboration?
Right. Are younger academics just more accustomed to a globalized world and all the opportunities that it presents?
Maybe it's about being more comfortable with technology and virtual collaboration.
It's certainly possible, yeah. With all the digital communication and online collaboration tools that we have these days, it's easier than ever for researchers to connect and work together no matter where they are physically located.
And maybe it's also a mindset thing. Maybe younger academics are just more open to embracing, different research cultures and perspectives.
That's possible. They might see themselves as part of a global community of scholars rather than being bound by national boundaries.
It's like their research identity kind of transcends geographical limitations. They're citizens of the world of knowledge.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and it speaks to how the very nature of academic collaboration and knowledge production might be evolving in the 21st century.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about what this means for the future of research. Could we see a more interconnected and collaborative global research landscape emerge, driven by this new generation of globally minded academics?
It's certainly a possibility, and it would be fascinating to see how those trends unfold in the coming years.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the challenges of identifying and supporting promising young researchers to the importance of creating a more equitable and inclusive academic environment. We've explored the complexities of university governance, the evolving nature of international collaboration, and even the fascinating differences in how researchers across various disciplines allocate their time.
It's been a whirlwind tour of the academic landscape.
It has, and we've uncovered some really thought-provoking questions along the way.
We have, and for you listening out there, we would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. What resonated with you? What questions are you still grappling with? What insights did you gain from this deep dive?
We're always eager to hear different perspectives and to continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What is it?
Remember that finding from the report about researchers in the natural sciences and humanities spending more time on research compared to those in technical and medical fields?
Yes, it was a surprising finding.
It really made me think about how we define and measure research productivity across different disciplines. Are we using the right metrics? Are we valuing different types of research contributions equally?
That's a crucial question, and it gets to the heart of what we consider valuable in academia. Are we prioritizing certain types of research outputs over others? Are we overlooking valuable contributions that might not fit neatly into our traditional measures of productivity?
It's like we're trying to compare apples and oranges. Each discipline has its own unique rhythm, its own set of demands, and its own ways of contributing to the advancement of knowledge.
Exactly. And it's important to recognize and value those differences rather than trying to force everything into a single standardized framework.
This deep dive has really highlighted the incredible diversity of the academic world and the need for a more nuanced understanding of what constitutes research success.
I couldn't agree more. We need to move beyond those simplistic metrics and embrace a more holistic view of research contributions.
Because true innovation and breakthroughs often come from those unexpected places, from those researchers who are pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
Absolutely. It's in those spaces of creative exploration and intellectual risk-taking that we often find the most transformative discoveries.
This deep dive has been a journey of exploration and discovery, hasn't it? We've delved into the complexities of the academic world, uncovered hidden trends, and grappled with some of the biggest challenges facing researchers today.
And it's clear that there are no easy answers, but by asking these tough questions, by challenging our assumptions, and by embracing a more inclusive and dynamic vision of research, we can create a more vibrant, equitable, and impactful academic landscape.
So for you listening out there, we encourage you to continue this journey of exploration. Keep asking those tough questions, keep challenging the status quo, and keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Because it's in those spaces of intellectual curiosity and fearless exploration that true breakthroughs are made.
This deep dive might be over, but your journey of discovery is just beginning.
Keep diving deep.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, are we setting up some researchers for a kind of publish or perish pressure cooker right when they're starting out?
It's a valid concern, and it brings up the question of, are we prioritizing quantity over quality when it comes to research output?
Right, because just churning out a ton of publications early on, that doesn't necessarily translate to groundbreaking discoveries or long-term impact.
Exactly, and if we're too focused on those early metrics, we might miss out on, those slow-burning projects that could actually lead to truly transformative breakthroughs down the line.
So maybe instead of just looking at, the number of publications, we need to consider other factors as well, like, the originality of the research, its potential for real-world applications, its contribution to actually advancing knowledge in a meaningful way.
Yeah, we need a more holistic view of what constitutes research success, one that goes beyond just, those simple quantitative measures.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about, the number of papers someone publishes. It's about the impact that their work has on the world.
100%. And that impact can take many forms, from advancing our understanding of fundamental scientific principles to developing new technologies that, actually improve people's lives.
This deep dive has really challenged me to rethink my own assumptions about, what it means to be a successful researcher.
Me too. It's been a really valuable reminder that there's no one single path to success in academia. There's so many different ways to make a meaningful contribution, and we need to create a system that supports and celebrates that diversity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
If you're, embarking on a research career or even just curious about how the world of academia works, don't be afraid to forge your own path. Embrace those unconventional ideas, those unexpected detours, those moments of serendipity that might actually lead you to your most groundbreaking work.
Yeah, and don't let anyone tell you there's only one way to be a successful researcher. There's room for all kinds of talent, all kinds of timelines in this vast and ever-evolving landscape of knowledge.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey, and we hope it sparked your curiosity to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the world of research.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving deep.